There's something every man needs to know, and perhaps more urgently today than ever before. It's not fashionable, it's not politically correct, and it certainly won't win you applause from the mob. But it's the truth. And the truth is this: women's emotions are not a problem to be solved, or a world to be understood. Now listen, because this matters. We're not talking about surface level sentimentality. We're talking about something far older, far deeper. Emotions in women are often manifestations of an ancient biological intelligence. These are not random outbursts or signs of instability. They're complex indicators of value, of safety, of connection, of meaning. And if you dismiss them, if you wave them off you, do so at the peril of your relationships and your soul. I remember when I was young, trying to navigate a stormy conversation with a woman I loved. She was upset clearly, and I responded the way many men do. I tried to fix it, problem solve, rationalize, lay out a clean map of logic like it was a math problem, and she looked at me not with anger, but with a kind of wounded disappointment, because what she needed wasn't a mechanic. She needed a witness, someone who would see her, hear her, sit in the storm with her, rather than build an umbrella and stand outside it. You see, there's a biological reason emotions are more immediate and vivid in women. From the time of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, it was often the women who had to monitor the social dynamics of the tribe. They were the ones who had to sense danger before it arrived. Their emotional systems evolved to be finely tuned, more sensitive. Not because of fragility, but because of necessity. That emotional depth is not only a burden, it's a gift. And when a man rejects it, he rejects the opportunity to know something vital about the human condition. Now here's the real tragedy. Many men are terrified of emotion, not just in women, but in themselves. They've been taught that masculinity means stoicism taken to the extreme. That if you feel too much, you're weak. That if you respond emotionally, you're unstable. That if you cry, you're less of a man. That's not strength. That's avoidance. That's cowardice masquerading as toughness. True strength is the ability to stand in the fire of feeling and not flinch. You're not called to control her emotions like a puppeteer. You're called to honor them, to bring the best of your reason, your groundedness, and your presence into the emotional arena, to stand with integrity in the face of chaos and not to run. And let me tell you something, when you do that, when you really listen, not with the intent to respond, but with the intent to understand, something miraculous happens. Trust grows, respect deepens, and love, the real kind, the kind forged in truth and fire, emerges. I've seen too many relationships collapse, not because the feelings were too much, but because they were ignored. Because men abdicated the responsibility of emotional leadership, mistaking silence for strength. That's a lie. The world doesn't need more quiet men. It needs brave men willing to confront what they don't understand. Men who lean in instead of turning away. So what should every man know about women's emotions? That they are not your enemy. They are not to be controlled, dismissed, or feared. They are sacred, they are human, and they are worthy of your respect. If you can do if you can meet her in that space, not only will your relationship transform, but you will transform, because it's in those moments of confrontation with the unknown that you become who you were meant to be. So stand up straight with your shoulders back and open your heart, not just your eyes. The world needs men who are both strong and sensitive. Be one of them. Would you like this formatted for a presentation, video script, or voiceover delivery? Certainly. Here's an expanded version of Keynote 1. Emotions are not weaknesses. They're signals of profound truths, delivered in the tone and cadence characteristic of Jordan Peterson, thoughtful, Cue the signal, prepare for. 3. Philosophical and rich with imagery and conviction. Let's begin with this fundamental idea. Emotions are not weaknesses, they are signals of profound truths. Now, that might sound like a slogan, something easy to nod along to, and then forget 5 minutes later. But if you sit with Ida, if you really think about, you'll begin to see how much of our suffering, especially in relationships between men and women, comes from a failure to understand this very premise. From a young age. Most boys, especially the more analytical, quiet, and dutiful taught, Ray Quife, are aldistic chivalry. Either directly or indirectly, that emotion is something dangerous. It's chaotic. It's unpredictable. It's a liability. You hear phrases like, be a man, don't cry, don't get emotional. The subtext is clear. Feeling deeply is a kind of moral failure. It makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability is weakness. And because of that conditioning, men often grow up seeing emotion, particularly in women, something irrational, something to be minimized, avoided, or shut down. But that's wrong. It's not just unhelpful, it's false, biologically and psychologically. Emotions are not the opposite of reason. They are not the enemy of logic. In fact, they are integral to the rational process itself. If you didn't have emotion, you wouldn't know what to care about. You wouldn't even know what decision to make, because value is communicated through emotional weight. What matters to you? You feel it before you can articulate it. You sense it before you can plan around it. Your emotional responses are like a compass there trying to point you toward something. And women, evolutionarily speaking, have developed a keener sense of that compass, not because they're weaker, but because their survival and that of their offspring depended on it. Imagine this, a mother thousands of years ago, sitting in a cave watching over her child. She's not armed with a spear. She's not running through the tundra. She has one tool above all else: awareness, emotional acuity. She notices subtle shifts in tone, slight deviations in behavior. She can tell when something is off, when a threat is near even when no one else can. That sensitivity, it wasn't a defect. It was adaptation. And it still is. So when a woman feels something deeply, even if it doesn't make immediate sense to you, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean she's being too much or too sensitive. It might mean she's picking up on something you've missed, something you haven't yet acknowledged. Maybe there's tension in the relationship. Maybe there's a shift in your behavior, or some unspoken fear, or a loss of trust, something. And instead of looking at the emotion and saying, what truth is this pointing to? You shut it down because it makes you uncomfortable. But here's the tragedy. When you ignore emotions, especially in the people you love, you're not being rational. You're being blind. You're throwing away information critical data because it doesn't come in the language you prefer. So, and this happens all the time, men treat feelings like background noise instead of what they are, the early warning systems of the soul. You wouldn't ignore a fire alarm just because it's loud and annoying. You wouldn't pull the batteries out of a smoke detector just because you don't see the smoke yet. But that's what we do with emotion, especially the emotional reactions of women. We treat them as nuisances instead of messages. And then we wonder why things fall apart. So let me put this plainly. Emotions are not superfluous. They're not decorative. They are meaningful. They are rooted in biology and experience and history. When a woman cries or rages or pulls back in silence, she's not just reacting randomly, she's reacting to something. Maybe something you haven't yet seen. Maybe something you don't want to see. But it's your job not to dismiss it, not to correct it, but to investigate it. Humbly, honestly, courageously. And if you can do Thatif, you can take her emotions seriously, not as inconveniences, but as truth signals, then you open the door to real communication, to depth, to trust, because you're not just hearing the words anymore, you're listening to the meaning beneath them. And that, gentlemen, is the foundation of any relationship worth keeping. Would you like to expand the next keynote as well? Certainly. Here's an expanded version of Keynote 2. Women's emotional depth is often a biological and evolutionary strength. Keynote. In Jordan Peterson's style layered with evolutionary psychology, personal reflection, and vivid analogies. Women's emotional depth is not an accident. It is not a flaw. And it certainly isn't something to be corrected. It's an evolutionary strength, forged through millennia of pressure, risk, and survival. And if you, as a man, fail to understand Thatif, you ignore it or belittle it, you're not just misunderstanding women, you're misunderstanding human nature itself. Let's get this straight. For hundreds of thousands of years, women were the stabilizing force of the tribe, while men hunted, fought, and wandered, engaging in bursts of high-risk, high-reward activity. Women stayed close to the hearth, to the children, to the community. Their role required a different kind of intelligence, a relational, perceptual, emotional intelligence. It wasn't enough for them to merely track events. They had to read people. They had to anticipate danger not by what was said, but by what was felt, what wasn't said. Think about that. To keep children alive, to maintain peace within a tribe, to sense threats in shifting social dynamics, you need a nervous system that's responsive, tuned in, alert, not neurotic, responsive, emotionally alive. That's not fragility. That's adaptation. That's survival-grade perception. This is why, today, women often pick up on emotional currents that men simply miss. You walk into a room, and she says, something's off. And you look around and say, I don't see anything wrong. That's the point. You don't see it, but she does. And if you're wise, you'll pay attention to that, because you're being offered a lens that has been sharpened by generations of necessity. Now, that emotional responsiveness, it comes with a cost. Sure it does. Everything powerful does. It means women are more affected by relational dynamics. It means they'll often feel things more intensely, process them more deeply, carry them for longer. And that intensity, that's not a failure. That's because what's happening matters. Emotional depth is the mind and body telling you this is significant. This is real. Pay attention. But here's where it becomes a problem. When men start interpreting that depth through the lens of masculine discomfort. You see her tears, and you think she's overreacting. You hear her anger, and you label it irrational. But maybe the issue isn't that she's feeling too much. Maybe it's that you're feeling too little. Or worse, that you've trained yourself not to feel at all. This is something I've seen time and time again in clinical work. Men retreat from emotional engagement because it's unfamiliar. It's unpredictable. They weren't taught how to navigate it, so they try to manage it like a broken machine titan. A screw here, silence, a warning light there. But emotions are not machines. They're more like weather systems. They come in patterns, they shift, they signal broader changes. And just like the weather, you don't control it, you adapt to it. You prepare for it. And you learn to read it. And when you stop rejecting that emotional language, Johan, you start understanding that women aren't being difficult. They're being deep. Then you start seeing their reactions not as problems, but as portals. You start asking, what is this emotion trying to tell us? What does it say about our connection? Our values or my needs? Because here's the crux. Women's emotional expressions are not random explosions. They are often the culmination of suppressed patterns, subtle shifts, unresolved concerns. A woman doesn't usually cry because of something small. She cries because of something accumulated. And if you trace it back, you'll often find a whole trail of moments where something meaningful was ignored or brushed aside. That that capacity to feel the tremors long before the earthquake, that's a gift, but only if you recognize it as such. Only if you respond to it not with cynicism or irritation, but with the curiosity and respect it deserves. So remember this, you're not stronger because you feel less. You're stronger when you can meet her emotional depth without drowning in it. Not because you rise above it, but because you anchor yourself within it like a pillar, steady in the tide. Would you like to continue with Keynote 3? Absolutely. Here's an expanded version of Keynote 3. Men misunderstand emotion because they fear vulnerability, written in Jordan Peterson's distinct voice-combining clinical insight, evolutionary psychology, and a personal philosophical edge. Men don't just misunderstand emotion, they fear it. And they fear it because at its core, emotion demands vulnerability. And vulnerability, for many men, is territory as foreign as the bottom of the ocean. From a very early age, boys are trained explicitly or implicitly to equate vulnerability with danger, weakness, exposure. And so they develop this internal equation, emotion, loss of control, threat. That's why so many men, when faced with emotional intensity, especially in women, withdraw, shut down. It's not just confusion. It's fear, and it runs deep. You'll have to understand this. Boys grew up in a hierarchy of dominance. It starts early in the playground, in sports, even in friendships. Strength is respected. Control is rewarded. If you cry, if you falter, if you hesitate, you're mocked, marginalized, or outright punished. That kind of psychological conditioning doesn't just vanish when you turn 25 and fall in love. It lingers. It builds armor, and that armor gets so thick that many men can't even recognize when they're being emotionally avoidant. They just call it being rational, being composite. But what it really ices fear in a suit of competence. I've seen this clinically, too. I'd be sitting across from a man in his 40s or 50s, successful, intelligent, responsible, and yet emotionally paralyzed. He could negotiate multi-million-dollar deals, manage companies, survive brutal divorces, but he couldn't sit in a room and feel something honestly, much less express it. And if his wife cried, if she voiced despair or pain, he'd freeze like a deer in the headlights. Not because he didn't care, but because he had no tools. His whole emotional blueprint